I'd never been to Tucson before that spring. Not really. I'd passed through once with my late husband, Harold, on the way to California in '79. He joked the air smelled like hot dust and onions. I remember laughing until my ribs ached. Now, decades later, I found myself here again, no Harold, just a rolling suitcase with a sticky wheel and my name taped inside on a faded index card. My son Kyle offered their guest room while my bathroom was being torn up back in Albuquerque. Said it would only be a couple weeks. Tina smiled and said, "Of course. It'll be so nice having you here. Like a live-in grandma." It wasn't a lie, not then. The kids were sweet. I made their lunches, drove them to soccer, even sat through that cartoon movie with the talking rabbits twice. I cooked most nights. Tina liked my lasagna. Kyle said nothing but took second helpings. In the evenings, I folded laundry in the hallway, careful not to take up too much space. I liked the quiet work, shirts warm from the dryer, the house dim but alive with the sounds of family. One Tuesday, as I smoothed out a pile of towels, I heard Tina's voice from the kitchen. "She just doesn't leave," she said, low and flat. "It's like she's made herself permanent." I froze. My fingers still pinched the corner of a t-shirt. I don't think she knew I was standing down the hall. I didn't move. Didn't breathe, really. Just let the words fall over me like a second skin. That night, I folded the rest of the laundry slower than usual. Took my time with the corners, the sleeves. I placed each item carefully on the shelf. Nothing else was said. Not to me, anyway. But something shifted. Not loud. Not even painful. Just quieter. A silence that stayed with me long after the light in the laundry room went off. It wasn't a sudden change. That's what made it hard to name. Like waking up one day and realizing the wallpaper's always been peeling. The next week, Tina forgot to set a plate for me when they ordered Thai food. I told myself she was just distracted. I spooned some rice into a teacup and sat at the end of the counter, back straight, elbows in. Kyle didn't say anything. Just scrolled on his phone. When I reminded the children to say thank you, after I'd taken the dog out, after I'd folded their socks, Kyle gave a tired sigh. "Mom, they're kids. Let them be." The house was always warm, but I started keeping a sweater on. Something about the air felt thinner. One night when friends came over, Tina laughed loudly from the living room and said, "Don't trip over Bonnie. She's always underfoot." Everyone chuckled. I did too. It was easier than letting the silence grow. I began to shrink myself without knowing. I'd stand in the kitchen corners when they cooked. I started waiting to be offered food rather than assuming I'd be included. The coffee maker had a new schedule, early for them, never for me. The cream I liked disappeared. So did the spare key I used to keep on a hook by the garage door. When I offered to chip in for groceries, Tina tilted her head and smiled like I was a child. "With what money, Bonnie? Your retirement pennies?" I chuckled weakly. She laughed louder. The worst part wasn't the insult. It was that Kyle didn't flinch. Every morning, I made the children's breakfasts. Toast cut diagonally, the way Ellie liked. Orange slices for Theo, who hated the peel left on. I tied their shoes, packed their backpacks, and waved from the porch. Tina never asked. And she never said thank you. Some days, the house felt less like a home and more like a stage I was allowed to clean between acts. I found myself staring at the family photo on the hallway wall, the one taken last Christmas, before I moved in. My arm was cropped out. I remembered that day. I'd baked cinnamon rolls and left early so they could take pictures alone. Even then, I'd already been stepping aside. Making room. Quietly removing myself from the center of my own family. I tried calling the contractor about my bathroom twice. Voicemail. On the third try, he texted back, "Still waiting on tile shipment. Could be another couple weeks." I stared at the message. The contractor I'd hired. The house I owned. And yet, here I was, unsure where I fit, unsure if I was even wanted. One evening, as I stood by the back window folding Kyle's dress shirts, he never asked, I just knew he wouldn't bother. I watched Tina on the patio, sipping a wine spritzer, her voice just loud enough to hear through the glass. She's sweet, but honestly, I didn't sign up for a third kid. I turned away before she saw me. It wasn't a moment I'll ever forget. Not because it was cruel, but because it was so normal. So easy for her to say. That night, I didn't cook. I stayed in the guest room. I heard them order pizza. No one knocked. I thought about asking again when my bathroom might be finished. But I didn't. I didn't want to be a burden. It became clear in the way Kyle stopped sitting with me during evening shows. In how Tina started texting me instructions instead of speaking them. Can you pick up Theo at 2:45 today? Remember to switch the laundry before 3. No peanuts in Ellie's lunch. No greeting. No thank you. Just commands. I started writing things down, not out of necessity, but so I could remind myself I was still doing something. Still keeping track. My planner became my diary. Pages filled with mundane notes, 2:45 pickup. Refill milk. Don't forget allergy meds. Quiet after 8. Quiet. Always quiet. At night, I sat on the edge of the guest bed, the same bed where Ellie had once asked me to tell her stories about when her daddy was small. Now, she barely looked up from her tablet when I entered the room. I heard Tina sigh once, not realizing the baby monitor reached the hallway. She's always hovering. Like she's just waiting for something. The next morning, I started going for walks. Nothing long. Just far enough to feel like I had chosen to be elsewhere. Once, I walked to a cafe down the road and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, tea in a paper cup. The girl behind the counter smiled and asked if I had a rewards card. I said no. She gave me a free cookie anyway. I nearly cried. It's strange how kindness feels like a shock when you've gone numb to it. The day my hip began to ache, I sat in the living room while the house emptied out for errands and playdates. I watched dust gather in a sunbeam, floating like something alive. No one asked where I was. No one noticed when I didn't cook. That evening, Tina handed me a cold slice of pizza and said, "Sorry. We forgot." Kyle didn't look up from the couch. I nodded. Ate in silence. Pretended the crust didn't hurt my teeth. Some nights, I thought about calling my sister, Margie. But what would I say? They're not mean. They're just tired of me. They're not cruel. They're just indifferent. They didn't ask for a tenant. I just never left. That's when it hit me. Maybe they never invited me in. They just never locked the door. It happened on a Sunday evening. The house smelled faintly of takeout and lemon cleaner. Ellie was upstairs, humming to herself in that distracted way children do when they've forgotten you're nearby. Theo had left his shoes in the hallway again, his laces always knotted into tiny impossible bundles. I bent down to untie them without thinking. I had just finished folding the last of the weekend laundry when I walked into the kitchen and asked, gently, hopefully, if I could stay one more week. My contractor said there's a hold-up with the grout or the plumbing, I said, not meeting Tina's eyes. Just another few days. She looked up from her phone and blinked. Then she stood and walked outside. I followed, confused. The sun was setting, casting long stripes of light across the driveway. Tina reached into her purse and pulled out something crumpled. She pressed it into my hand like a receipt. It was cash, $8. Small bills, soft at the corners. "We need the house back," she said. "I hope this covers the bus." And then, louder, to Kyle who was waiting in the car with the engine already running, "Let's go." She turned without another word. Her heels clicked softly against the stone path. Kyle didn't get out. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't even look at me. They pulled out of the driveway like it was any other Sunday errand. I stood there in my shoes, not yet tied, laundry basket still warm against my hip. In one hand, $8. In the other, my coat slung over my arm. And just like that, it was clear. I wasn't family. I was furniture. The kind you move when it starts to take up too much room. I stayed on the porch until the sky turned the color of old milk. My breath fogged in front of me, the desert chill settling in like a quiet reprimand. I didn't cry. Crying would have given the moment too much ceremony. Instead, I walked slowly back inside. Not to plead. Not to argue. Just to gather the pieces of myself left scattered in their corners. I packed with deliberate hands. A canvas bag with my toiletries. My planner. The sweater I wore too often because it didn't itch. Ellie's last drawing, half a rainbow, half a heart, tucked quietly into the side pocket. No note. I didn't take everything. Just what was mine. I left the casserole dish, the gardening gloves, the spice jars I'd organized on the second shelf. As I stepped outside again, I paused. Not out of hesitation, just to listen. The house behind me was quiet. Too quiet. Like it had already forgotten I'd ever been part of it. I walked to the end of the block and caught the last city bus out of the neighborhood. The driver didn't look twice at me. Just nodded and pulled away from the curb. I sat near the back, coat buttoned, bag on my lap. $8 lighter. Decades heavier. We passed the lights of familiar places, parks, the pharmacy, the diner Kyle used to beg to visit after Little League. I watched them blur into nothing. That night, I checked into a motel near the highway, $41 for a night, plus a $5 key deposit. The woman at the front desk called me ma'am and offered extra towels. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners. The bedspread was scratchy and smelled faintly of pine cleaner. But it was mine for the night. I didn't cry. I lay back, hands folded over my stomach, and stared at the ceiling. I thought about my husband, long gone now. About the double shifts I'd worked to get Kyle through college. About the birthday parties I baked for, the emergency room visits I drove him to, the nights I stayed up sewing costumes or waiting in worry. And now, here I was. Too much to keep. Not enough to miss. The next morning, I walked across the parking lot to a gas station. Bought a coffee that tasted like warm mud and a scratch-off lottery ticket, Powerball. $5 left. I held on to the rest for cab fare, just in case. I didn't buy the ticket because I believed in luck. Not really. I bought it because I needed something, anything, to believe in. Something to hold that wasn't resentment. Something absurd enough to distract me from the ache in my lower back and the quiet knowledge that the world had moved on without me. I tucked the ticket into my planner and zipped it shut. Back at the motel, I sat by the window and watched the sky lighten. No messages from Kyle. None from Tina. Just silence. But somehow, that was easier than the sound of her heels walking away. The motel was across from a chain restaurant I used to eat at once a year, Mother's Day, when Kyle still remembered. I didn't go in. Just watched the red neon flicker in the puddles left by last night's sprinkler system. I sat at the little desk by the window and wrote in my planner, though I had nowhere to be. Monday, pick up tea, Advil, hand lotion. That was all. I didn't call anyone. I didn't try to explain. Part of me wanted to believe that Kyle would text. That he'd say it was all a mistake. That they didn't mean it. But the phone stayed still. No buzz. No name on the screen. The silence said more than any message could. The motel gave me a weak cup of coffee in the lobby, no sugar. I sipped it anyway. Habit. Heat. Some days you just need something warm to hold. I spent that afternoon walking. Just walking. Nothing far. My hip was already aching from the night before, but I moved slowly, past the car wash, the strip mall with the dusty signs, a pawn shop offering quick cash for gold. I had a pearl ring in my purse, but I didn't go in. I wasn't that desperate yet. I stopped in a public library that smelled like dust and laminate. I found a chair near the back and sat down. No one noticed me. That was the point. There's something sacred about being ignored in public. It reminded me of the hospital nights from my nursing days, those quiet shifts when the world forgot itself for a while. I stayed there until the lights flickered politely overhead. Closing time. Back in the motel, I heated a can of soup in the microwave and ate it with a plastic spoon. The room hummed with a kind of emptiness I'd forgotten how to sit in. Before sleep, I pulled the lottery ticket from my planner and looked at it again. The numbers meant nothing yet, just random ink on shiny paper. But I held it like it meant something. Because some part of me, long buried, needed to believe that the world still had room for unlikely kindness. The next morning came without fanfare. I washed my hair in the motel sink and dried it with a hand towel. My reflection in the mirror looked tired but calm. I had survived worse. By Wednesday, I'd found the senior center downtown. Free coffee, quiet corners, and an old upright piano no one played. I sat through a bridge club I didn't join and listened to a woman named Joanne talk about her corgi's diet. When she asked where I was from, I lied and said Phoenix. She nodded, like that explained something. Sometimes, it's easier to invent a past than to unpack the real one. I went back to the library that afternoon. Found the same chair. The same faint hum of the ceiling fan. At 3:58 p.m., the Powerball numbers came on. I watched them scroll slowly across the little television mounted near the reference desk. The numbers matched. All of them. I didn't react. I didn't stand up or shout or even blink too hard. I just sat there, planner in my lap, ticket held lightly between two fingers. $73 million. That's what the ticker said. I looked around. No one saw me. No one knew. It felt like standing at the edge of a wide, silent ocean. Nothing but horizon. I stayed until the broadcast ended, then slipped the ticket back into my bag. No hurry. No rush. No witnesses. That night, back at the motel, I turned off my phone. The screen was still blank. Still quiet. And that was when it felt real. They had thrown me out with $8 and the assumption I'd vanish. And now, I could. Not out of spite. Not for revenge. But because I finally had the means to disappear without apology. I didn't cash the ticket right away. For 3 days, I carried it folded neatly inside the inner sleeve of my planner, right where I used to jot down Kyle's school events and Tina's appointments. It rested there like a pressed flower, unassuming, private. Something that had once been alive in a way no one else could see. There was no ceremony to those days. I woke early, made tea from a motel packet, walked quietly to the library, sat in the same chair near the window. The sun came in at a slant, warming the carpet just enough to make the world seem less indifferent. Nobody noticed me. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like safety. The day I finally went to the claim office, I wore the same sweater Tina once joked made me look like a schoolteacher from the 50s. I took the bus, used the last of those $8 she handed me. I folded the bill 3 times before placing it in the slot, the edges soft from too many hands. The woman behind the counter looked bored until she saw the numbers. Then she blinked. Stared. Typed something. Called someone over. After that, things moved quickly, but gently. They took me into a quiet room. Offered coffee. Not the weak motel kind, real coffee, in a porcelain cup. No plastic lids. No rush. I asked for it black. They called me Ms. Hargrove with soft deference, as if my first name might crack something open. The paperwork took hours. A lawyer spoke kindly. A financial advisor explained things I didn't understand, and I nodded along. I chose the lump sum. After taxes, just under $47 million. I didn't ask what to do with it. I already knew. That afternoon, I bought a bus ticket to Montana. No flight. No limo. Just the bus. Seat by the window. Planner in my lap. The ticket folded inside. The trip took 2 days. The landscape changed slowly, flat dust gave way to mountains and pine. I didn't sleep much. I didn't need to. There was a peace in movement, in knowing the next place would not carry their names. By the time I stepped off in a town called Winters Hollow, population small enough to fit inside a church hall, I felt lighter than I had in years. I rented a cottage with peeling shutters and a wood stove that needed coaxing. Paid cash. No questions. The realtor was a man named Dale who smelled of tobacco and would polish. He called me Miss Bonnie and asked if I liked quiet. I told him I preferred it. The first morning, I swept the porch. The bristles caught on the warped slats, and I smiled. It wasn't perfect. But it was mine. I bought groceries from a corner store run by a woman named May. She wore sweaters with buttons shaped like cats and gave me a free jar of preserves after our third chat. "You remind me of someone," she said. I didn't ask who. I volunteered at the women's shelter a few blocks away. Just once a week, chopping vegetables, folding linens. No one knew who I was. They just called me Bonnie and thanked me when I wiped down the counters. That was enough. No luxury. No announcement. Just a life returned, thread by thread. I took long walks among the pine. Read books without interruption. Watered a row of potted herbs that grew slow and stubborn. I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't hire help. I didn't replace the sweater Tina called frumpy. I just let the days come quietly. 2 weeks after I settled in, Tina texted. The screen lit up late one morning while I was making tea. Just her name, sharp against the calm. "Bonnie, don't be dramatic. We just needed space. Come back if you can behave this time." No apology. Just authority. As if I had wandered off like a disobedient pet. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I placed the phone face down and finished my tea. She hadn't asked if I was safe. Hadn't asked where I'd gone. She just expected I'd return. Because for her, I was still the one who folded shirts and stayed quiet. That afternoon, I walked to the post office and ordered a change of address. Winters Hollow. P.O. Box 112. A clean break. I didn't block their numbers. I just stopped responding. The life they pushed me from had narrowed around them like a net. Mine was finally wide open. The first call came on a Thursday. I let it ring. Then a second one came, and a third. All from Kyle. I turned the volume down and watched the phone light up and dim again on the windowsill beside my rosemary plant. By Friday, Tina texted. "We've been trying to reach you. The kids miss you. Things are hard right now. Can we talk?" The tone was softer, but I knew it wasn't sorrow. It was strategy. I waited a full day before replying. One line. "I've been feeling unwell. Might be time to slow down." She answered within minutes. "Maybe it's time you considered assisted living. There's a nice one near us. They even let families visit on weekends." Visit. Supervised, scheduled, sanitized. I could picture the brochures. A cheerful nurse holding someone's hand, plastic flowers in the windowsill. I read the message twice. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to contain me. I didn't reply. Instead, I wrote a letter to the shelter asking if they needed help 2 days a week instead of one. I began spending more time at the cottage. Pulled weeds. Painted the shutters pale blue. May from the grocery store gave me a bundle of old tulip bulbs she'd forgotten in her freezer. I planted them anyway. Not because I expected them to bloom, but because I liked the waiting. The phone rang less often, but when it did, the messages grew more urgent. "We're trying to help you, Mom. You shouldn't be alone at your age. The kids have been asking about you every day." It was always framed like concern. But none of them had asked where I was. None had said sorry. A week later, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. A typed message from a firm I didn't recognize, offering to assist in managing your estate for the benefit of your loved ones. I smiled. They were circling. I called the post office and removed the forwarding order. From then on, everything stayed in Winter's Hollow. One morning in early spring, I returned from the library and found a padded envelope on my doorstep. No return address. Inside was a handmade card. Crayon drawings. 2 stick figures labeled Grandma and me. It was from Ellie. No note from Tina. No mention of Kyle. Just the child. I placed the card on the mantel beside a pine cone I'd picked up on my first walk here. It was the only part of my old life that felt honest. Later that week, Kyle left a voicemail. His voice was clipped, practiced. I don't know what this is about, Mom. If you're angry, fine. But you don't need to punish everyone. The kids need their grandmother. We need some help. Help. Even now, the word wasn't offered, it was expected. I thought about the years I'd spent making their lives smoother. Babysitting, groceries, co-signed loans. I remembered the dentist bill I paid when Kyle chipped a tooth and didn't have insurance. The time I loaned them my car for just a weekend that turned into 3 months. Not once had I asked for anything in return. Now, all I wanted was distance. And that, apparently, was the one thing they couldn't afford. By the end of the month, the calls stopped. The silence returned. And with it, a calm I hadn't known since before Harold died. I baked bread that week, just for myself. Ate it warm with butter, alone at the kitchen table. No one asking for seconds. No one joking about carbs. That night, I lit a candle and sat by the window. Outside, the air was turning. The pine trees were still, listening. I thought again about Ellie's drawing. There was still love in the world. But not all of it needed to be salvaged from the ruins. Some of it could grow fresh, in a place where no one expected me to disappear. It was early May when the invitation arrived. Thick cardstock, embossed lettering. A formal dinner at Kyle and Tina's. The return address was theirs, but the sender was anonymous. The tone was rehearsed, cautious, like it had passed through several drafts. Inside, a note in Tina's handwriting, "We'd love to see you. The children miss you terribly. Let's start fresh." I held the envelope over the sink for a moment. Thought about tearing it. Thought about calling May and laughing about it. But in the end, I did neither. Instead, I packed a small bag, called a car service, and arrived exactly on time the following Saturday evening. Tucson's heat hit me differently this time, no longer familiar. Their house looked the same from the outside, but something in the siding seemed older now. A kind of where I hadn't noticed before. Tina opened the door wearing pearls and a tight smile. Kyle stood behind her, hands in his pockets like a nervous boy caught in something he couldn't quite name. The table was set for 5. Candles. Wine. Linen napkins folded into triangles. I had worn the cardigan Tina once called too plain for guests. It felt right. Ellie hugged me. Theo gave a small wave. They both looked surprised to see me. Dinner was roasted chicken, lemon risotto, something green on the side that no one touched. Tina poured the wine with exaggerated care. Kyle asked questions like a stranger trying to build a bridge from stones he'd already dropped into the river. "How's the weather up there? Still volunteering? Do you get lonely?" I answered simply. Honestly. Briefly. The meal passed with too many pauses. Forks scraped. Glasses clinked. No laughter. After dessert, a tart that Tina insisted she baked herself, Kyle cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, "we wanted to talk to you about something." I nodded. Waited. "There's this place," he continued, shifting in his chair. "Sunset Acres. It's nearby, really lovely. We toured it last week. They have activities, a shuttle, meal service. Tina interrupted, her voice smooth and practiced. You'd still see the kids, of course. With supervision. They're too young to handle emotional stress. Emotional stress. As if my presence came with hazard tape. Kyle picked up where she left off. We just want you to have the best care. And peace of mind for us, too. We thought maybe you'd consider it. For everyone's benefit. They smiled then. Polite. Expectant. Like a doctor waiting for you to nod after bad news. I reached slowly into my purse. Pulled out a folded piece of paper. Worn at the corners. I laid it flat on the table in front of them. It was a photocopy of the winning ticket. The one I'd never shown anyone. Not even the people at the claim office. Kyle leaned forward. His brows furrowed. Then rose. Tina paled. No one spoke. I tucked the paper back into my bag. I don't think I'll need your help finding a place to live, I said. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard in that house. Kyle opened his mouth. Closed it. Tina's hand gripped her wine glass too tightly. Ellie looked at me, then at her father, then back again. I stood up. Adjusted the cardigan at my wrist. Smoothed my skirt. I see now I was never welcome here, I said, my voice level. And now, you're not welcome in my life. I turned to the children. I'll always love you. That doesn't change. But I won't be visiting again. Ellie started to speak, but Tina's sharp glance stopped her. I walked to the door. My bag felt light. My hand steady. No one followed. Outside, the sun had dipped below the rooftops. The heat clung like memory. I didn't look back. That night, I stayed in the same motel as before. Same room, even. But it felt different. Less like an exile, more like a waiting room for the life I had already chosen. I watched the news on mute. Ate crackers from my bag. Slept without dreams. The next morning, I boarded the bus home to Montana. As the city shrank behind me, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I just felt finished. They had made their choice. And now, so had I. Back in Montana, the spring thaw had turned the trails behind my house soft and uneven. I walked them anyway, stepping carefully, my boots sinking a little with each step. The pines whispered above, and the earth smelled of something old and waking. The cottage sat quiet when I returned, as it always did. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and was met with stillness. Not loneliness. Just silence that belonged to me. I placed my bag on the hook by the door, poured water into the kettle, and watched the steam rise, curling like breath. There were no more calls from Kyle. No apologies. No messages asking where I'd gone. The quiet from their side now matched mine. I didn't mind. I woke early each day, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The mornings were slow and kind. I drank my tea while the birds tapped their beaks against the feeder I'd built from old fence wood. I planted herbs in the soil beside the porch, thyme, mint, rosemary. Their scent clung to my fingers as I trimmed and watered, reminding me that small things still thrived if given enough care. Once a week, I walked into town to help at the shelter. I chopped vegetables, folded laundry, sat with women who spoke in low tones about what they'd left behind. I didn't ask questions. Neither did they. But sometimes, in the silence, we shared something quieter than language. At the grocery store, May always greeted me with a smile and a question about my tulips, which had not yet bloomed. They'll take their time, she'd say. Like anyone who's been through too much cold. I learned the names of the crows that perched on my fence. I started a list of books I wanted to read and actually finished one. I even bought myself a new robe, not expensive, just soft, blue, and mine. One evening, I invited 2 of the women from the shelter over for soup. We sat on the porch under a thick blanket, watching the stars flicker. One of them, Carlene, said it was the first time she'd eaten a meal in someone's home in over a year. We didn't toast. We didn't make speeches. We just sat and listened to the world exhale. It was enough. I kept my wealth quiet. There were no luxury renovations, no new car. I still took the bus into town. Still mended socks instead of buying new ones. The money wasn't a victory. It was a key to a quieter door. I donated small amounts, anonymously, grocery cards left under doors, winter coats at the shelter tagged just the right size, overdue utility bills paid by someone in town. It felt like something Harold would have done. I wore his watch some days, just to hear it tick. The only thing new in my house was a small wood stove I had installed after the first cold snap. I liked the sound it made at night. The steady crackle. The warmth spreading slow and certain across the floorboards. On my birthday, I made myself a lemon cake. Shared it with May, who brought coffee in a thermos and a photo of her grandson. We ate in silence, watching the wind play through the pine. There were no cards from Kyle. No messages. No reminders of the door they closed. And I no longer waited for one. I had stopped being the woman who needed an open door. Now, I was the one who built new ones. It was late November when winter arrived in full. The frost stayed all day now, edging the windows in white, like lace pressed gently from the outside. I stacked firewood on the porch and found comfort in the repetition, one log at a time, lined up neat. I hadn't thought about Kyle in weeks. Not with anger. Not with longing. Just hadn't thought of him. Until the message came. My phone buzzed as I was setting down a tray of rolls at the shelter. I ignored it at first. I always did when I was with the women, some habits stuck, like not answering during supper. But later, back home, I saw the name. Tina. No subject. Just a few lines. The kids miss you. Kyle does too. Can we talk? Please. That last word sat strange in my mouth. Please. I read the message twice. Then again. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just absence wrapped in want. I set the phone down without replying. I thought of the last time we'd spoken, her hands on a wine glass, Kyle's silence, the phrase emotional stress tossed out like a diagnosis. What did they want now? Help again? Forgiveness? Or just to refile me back into the role I'd quietly outgrown? The next morning, another message. A number I didn't recognize. This one reads simply. Grandma, it's Ellie. Can I call you? I miss you. I sat down. The weight of it, not heavy, just sharp. Like a pinprick in soft cloth. Ellie. I hadn't allowed myself to hope. Not even once. She was just a child. And children, if nothing else, follow the tides of their homes. But here she was. I replied. You can always call me, sweetheart. The phone rang minutes later. Her voice was smaller than I remembered, higher and more hesitant. Grandma, she said. I closed my eyes for a second. Let the sound settle in my chest. I'm here, I said. I've been here. She said Tina didn't know she was calling. That she'd taken her dad's phone after he fell asleep on the couch. He's been sad, she added. Mom says it's your fault. I didn't respond to that. Instead, I asked how school was. What book she was reading. Whether Theo still hated onions. She giggled. Said he spit one into his napkin last week and tried to hide it in his sleeve. We talked for 12 minutes and 38 seconds. I knew, because I watched the screen the whole time, holding the image of her name there like a fire I didn't want to lose. When we said goodbye, she asked when I'd visit. I told her gently, not soon, sweetheart. But you can call me anytime. I meant it. That night, I sat by the fire and listened to the wind slide over the eaves. Outside, the pine trees creaked softly, as if nodding in agreement. Some bonds do survive. But not all. Some die not with explosions, but with neglect, quiet, passive, routine. Like a garden left to frost. I didn't reply to Tina's message. Didn't open the ones that followed, each a little more urgent, a little more desperate. I left them unread, like unopened mail from a place I used to live. The past had knocked. I had answered only the part still worth holding. The rest, I let pass through me like wind through bare branches. She threw me out on the street with $8. Not with a scream. Not with a slammed door. Just a crumpled fistful of bills and a back turned too fast for goodbye. I remember the sound the door made as it latched behind me, light, almost kind. As if the house itself didn't want to make a fuss. That night, I slept in a motel with a scratchy blanket and the hum of a vending machine through the wall. The streetlight blinked all night outside my window, like it couldn't decide what I was worth. A week later, Tina messaged me, asking me to behave. And by then, I held the numbers to a life she could never touch. $73 million. And silence. The kind you build around yourself, not out of fear, but out of finality. They tried to shame me into smallness. Tried to reframe my care as obligation. Tried to plant the idea that I'd always be the woman waiting by the door, coat in hand, grateful for scraps. But I learned something in the absence. That love built on expectation is not love at all. That you can miss a child and still choose yourself. That not all homes are meant to be returned to. Now, I live in a town where no one measures me against what I give. Where I wake up and make tea in a mug no one rolls their eyes at. Where I speak only when I want to, and no one finishes my sentences for me. The rosemary is thriving by the porch. Ellie calls sometimes. I answer every time. She never asks why I left. She only tells me what she's learning. That's enough. There are no more messages from Kyle. No more asks disguised as check-ins. No more plans made in my absence, handed to me like prescriptions. They gambled on the idea that I wouldn't leave. And they lost. Now, I spend my evenings with a book, my mornings with the wind. And when I walk the trail behind my house, I carry no bitterness. Only the memory of that night, that door, and those $8. The moment I realized I was no longer the woman who needed the door open. And I never will be again.